Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Christmas Eve has never been the same for me since 2017. My wife had left 6 months prior, divorce finalized right before Thanksgiving, and there I was, a man who had graduated college the same year Facebook went public, spending the holidays alone in a house that suddenly felt too big for one person. I worked as an insurance adjuster, the kind of job where you see enough property damage and human tragedy to make you numb, or so I thought. That year, I had declined every invitation from family and friends, convinced that solitude would be easier than pretending to be festive. My neighborhood in suburban Minnesota was the picture-perfect kind you see in holiday movies. Rows of houses decorated with lights, inflatable snowmen on lawns, and families shuffling between homes with plates of cookies. The Donnelly family lived 3 doors down: Patrick and Christine, their teenage daughter Amber, and their 10-year-old son Miles. We were not close, but we had that comfortable neighbor relationship built on waving from driveways and occasional small talk about weather and lawn care. The snow started falling around 4 in the afternoon, thick and relentless, the kind of storm that makes you grateful for a working furnace and a stocked pantry. I had spent most of the day on my couch watching old movies, nursing a bottle of bourbon that was supposed to last me through New Year's. By 8 that evening, the world outside had turned into a white blur, and I decided to step onto my porch just to watch the storm swallow the streetlights. That is when I noticed it. The Donnellys' front door wide open, a rectangle of warm yellow light spilling out onto their snow-covered porch. At first, I assumed someone had just stepped outside, maybe to grab something from a car or check on decorations. But minutes passed and that door stayed open, snow beginning to drift across their welcome mat. I remember thinking it was strange, wasteful even, with the heating bill that would cost them. I waited another 5 minutes watching, expecting Patrick to appear and close it. Nobody came. The door just hung there, an invitation or a warning, and something in my gut told me I needed to walk over there. I pulled on my boots and heavy coat, grabbed a flashlight more out of habit than necessity, and trudged through the accumulating snow toward their house. The wind cut through me as I crossed the distance, and by the time I reached their porch, my face was numb and my beard had collected ice crystals. I called out before stepping inside, "Patrick? Christine? Everything okay?" But my voice seemed to get swallowed by the storm behind me. The silence that answered was absolute, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and wrong. I stepped through the doorway, stamping snow off my boots on their mat, and immediately the warmth of the house wrapped around me along with the smell of roasted turkey and pine needles from their Christmas tree. The living room looked like a catalog photo. Tree decorated with gold and red ornaments, presents scattered around its base with torn wrapping paper, stockings hung above a fireplace where embers still glowed orange. Everything screamed normal holiday evening, except for the complete absence of the people who should have been enjoying it. I moved further into the house, calling their names again, my voice cracking slightly in that empty space. The dining room table stopped me cold. It was fully set. 5 places I remember counting, which struck me as odd since there were only 4 of them. With a carved turkey sitting in the center, steam no longer rising from it, but the meat still glistening. Mashed potatoes in a ceramic bowl, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce still holding the shape of the can it came from. Wine glasses filled halfway, one of them with a lipstick mark on the rim. Plates had food on them, partially eaten, forks and knives resting at angles that suggested people had simply stood up mid-bite and walked away. A chair had been knocked backward, lying on its side against the wall, and that detail made my throat tighten. Christmas music was still playing softly from a speaker somewhere, some instrumental version of Silent Night that suddenly sounded mocking in all that emptiness. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my fingers clumsy from the cold, and told the dispatcher that something was very wrong at the Donnelly residence on Birchwood Lane. The first squad car arrived within 12 minutes. though it felt like an hour standing in that house alone. I had not moved from the dining room, afraid to touch anything, afraid to contaminate whatever scene this was. 2 officers came through the front door with their hands near their holsters, and I immediately raised mine to show I was not a threat. I explained who I was, where I lived, what I had seen. They searched the house room by room while I waited in the living room, and I heard one of them curse sharply from somewhere upstairs. More cars arrived. Unmarked sedans, a crime scene van, an ambulance that sat idle with its lights off. The snow kept falling, and I watched through the window as officers stretched yellow tape between trees in the front yard, their flashlight beams cutting through the white darkness. A detective named Ruiz introduced himself to me, a stocky man with tired eyes and a notebook that looked like it had seen 1,000 bad nights. He asked me to walk him through everything again, from the moment I noticed the open door, and I did. My voice steadier now, but my mind racing with questions I knew he would not answer. Detective Ruiz kept me at the scene for 3 more hours, going over my statement again and again until I could recite it in my sleep. Around midnight, he finally told me what they had found, or rather, what they had not found. The Donnelly family was gone, all 4 of them, with no indication of where they went or why. But there was blood. Not a lot, he said, just enough to worry about. A smear on the kitchen counter, droplets on the basement stairs, and a trail of footprints leading out the back door into the yard. The prints were from heavy boots, size 11 or 12, and they led about 40 feet into the snow before the storm had erased them completely. No bodies, no signs of a struggle beyond that overturned chair, no forced entry on any door or window. Their cars were still in the garage, a Subaru Outback and a Ford pickup, keys hanging on the hook by the kitchen door. Wallets, phones, coats, all still inside the house. Whoever left through that back door had walked out into a blizzard dressed for winter, but the Donnellys had apparently vanished in whatever they were wearing to Christmas dinner. Ruiz asked me if I had seen anyone unusual in the neighborhood lately, any strangers or unfamiliar vehicles. I told him no, and that was the truth, though I would spend the next weeks replaying every mundane detail of the past month searching for something I might have missed. The case exploded across local news by Christmas morning, and by the 26th, it had gone national. A family of 4 vanishing on Christmas Eve. A holiday dinner abandoned mid-meal. Bloody footprints leading nowhere. It was the kind of story that cable news channels devour. Reporters descended on Birchwood Lane like locusts, their vans lining both sides of the street, satellite dishes pointed at the gray winter sky. I made the mistake of answering my door once, thinking it was another detective, and found myself facing a woman with a microphone and a cameraman already recording. I slammed the door without a word, but they had enough footage to run my face on the evening broadcast alongside the caption, "Neighbor who discovered scene." My phone rang constantly with numbers I did not recognize, journalists, true crime podcasters, people claiming to be psychics who wanted to help. I unplugged my landline and let my cell die, watching the circus outside through a gap in my curtains. The Donnelly house sat dark now, sealed with police tape, and I could not stop staring at it at that front door I had walked through, wondering what had happened in the hours before I noticed it standing open. The surveillance footage surfaced 3 days after Christmas, leaked to a local station before police could control the narrative. A neighbor 2 houses down from the Donnellys had one of those doorbell cameras, and it had captured something that made the story even more disturbing. The footage showed a figure approaching the Donnelly home around 2 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. Hours before dinner would have been served, hours before I saw that open door. The person was bundled in a dark winter coat, hood pulled up, face obscured by a scarf and the angle of the camera. They walked with purpose, no hesitation, straight up the driveway and to the front door. The door opened before they even knocked. Someone inside had let them in willingly, which meant the Donnellys knew this person, or at least expected them. The footage had no audio, just that grainy, silent image of a figure disappearing into a house where 4 people would later vanish. Police released a statement asking the public for help identifying the individual, but the winter gear made it impossible. Could have been anyone, any gender, any age. I watched that clip dozens of times on my laptop, pausing and rewinding, trying to see something in the way they moved that might spark recognition. I never did, but I noticed something else that the news reports did not mention. The figure was carrying a small duffel bag, the kind you might take to a gym, and when they entered the house, that bag went with them. Detective Ruiz called me in for a second interview on New Year's Eve, and the tone had shifted in a way that made my palms sweat. The questions were no longer about what I had seen that night. They were about me. How well did I know the Donnellys? Had I ever been inside their home before? What was my relationship with Christine? Did I have any financial troubles, any grudges, any reason to wish harm on that family? I answered everything as calmly as I could, but I understood what was happening. I was the one who found the scene, the one who called it in. The divorced man spending Christmas alone with a bottle of bourbon and no alibi beyond my own word. In true crime stories, the person who discovers the body is always the first suspect. Ruiz did not accuse me of anything directly, but he mentioned that my footprints were found inside the house, that my fingerprints were on the dining room doorframe where I had steadied myself while staring at that abandoned meal. He asked if I would be willing to provide a DNA sample, and I said yes immediately because I had nothing to hide. But walking out of that police station, I felt eyes on me. Officers glancing up from their desks, a receptionist who looked away too quickly. I was no longer just a witness. I had become a person of interest, and in a case this public, that distinction could ruin a life. The harassment started subtly at first, then escalated into something I could not ignore. Anonymous messages flooded my work email, accusing me of involvement, demanding I confess to what I had done to that poor family. Someone spray-painted the word killer across my garage door in red letters 3 feet tall, and when I reported it to police, the officer who responded looked at me like I had done it myself for sympathy. My employer suggested I take a leave of absence until things calmed down, a polite way of saying my presence had become a liability. I stopped going outside during daylight hours, timing my grocery runs for late nights when the parking lots were empty. A true crime forum online had dedicated an entire thread to analyzing my 911 call, dissecting my word choices, my pauses, the slight tremor in my voice when I described the dining room table. Armchair detectives declared me guilty based on nothing but gut feelings and the grainy screenshot of my face from that first news broadcast. One night, I found a man parked outside my house taking photographs of my windows. When I confronted him, he said he was a blogger working on a documentary about the case, and he asked me point blank if I had killed the Donnellys. I told him to leave before I called the police, and he laughed, actually laughed, and said the police were probably just waiting for enough evidence to arrest me. I went back inside and sat in the dark for hours, wondering if this was what the rest of my life would look like. The break in the case came in mid-February, and it did not come from brilliant detective work or a dramatic confession. A hiker found human remains in a state park 60 miles north of our neighborhood, partially buried beneath snow and frozen leaves. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was the Donnelly family, all 4 of them, buried together in a shallow grave. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, and investigators estimated they had been killed on Christmas Eve, likely within hours of sitting down for that holiday dinner. The news hit me like a physical blow, even though I had known deep down that they were not coming back. But the discovery also brought answers that finally shifted attention away from me. DNA evidence at the burial site matched a man named Curtis Bellamy, Christine Donnelly's estranged brother, who had been released from a psychiatric facility in Ohio just 3 weeks before Christmas. He had a history of violent episodes, a restraining order that Christine had filed against him years ago, and a documented obsession with what he believed was his rightful share of their deceased parents' estate. The 5th place setting at the dinner table suddenly made terrible sense. They had invited him, or perhaps he had invited himself, hoping to reconcile during the holidays. Whatever happened at that table had ended with 4 people dead and Curtis walking out the back door into a blizzard, carrying whatever evidence he could fit in that duffel bag. They arrested Curtis Bellamy at a motel in Wisconsin 3 days after the bodies were found, still wearing the same winter coat from the surveillance footage, still carrying identification belonging to Patrick Donnelly. He confessed to everything within hours of his arrest, showing no remorse, describing the murders in clinical detail that the newspapers mercifully did not print. The case was closed, the media moved on to the next tragedy, and Birchwood Lane slowly returned to its catalog-perfect quietness. But nothing returned to normal for me. I sold my house that spring, took a job in a different state, and started over in a city where nobody knew my face or my name. Sometimes I still dream about that open door, that rectangle of yellow light spilling onto the snow, and I wake up with my heart pounding and the taste of copper in my mouth. I did the right thing that night. I called for help when something looked wrong, and it nearly destroyed my life anyway. The Donnellys are buried in a cemetery I have never visited, and Curtis Bellamy is serving 4 consecutive life sentences in a prison I try not to think about. But what stays with me, what I cannot shake even now, is that moment of hesitation on my porch before I walked over. I almost did not go. I almost convinced myself it was none of my business, that the door would close on its own, that whatever was happening in that house was not my concern. If I had turned around and gone back inside, poured another glass of bourbon, and minded my own business, I would have slept peacefully that night. The Donnellys would still be dead, but I would not have known. And some nights, in my weaker moments, I wonder if that ignorance might have been a mercy. My mother called on December 21st, 2017, and the first thing she said was that Uncle Ray had left specific instructions in his will. Not hello, not how are you, not even an acknowledgement that we had not spoken in almost 3 years, just his name and the word instructions, and then silence on the line while she waited for me to respond. I was sitting in my cubicle at the accounting firm in Boston, staring at spreadsheets I no longer cared about, when her number appeared on my phone. She explained that everyone was coming home for Christmas dinner. Everyone, she repeated, as if that word carried some terrible weight. My cousin Wade, my Aunt Francine, my Uncle Teddy, people I had not seen since before I graduated high school in 2009. Uncle Ray wanted us all together one last time, she said, and something in her voice made me grip the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. He had died 3 weeks earlier under circumstances nobody would explain to me over the phone, and now I was being summoned back to the farmhouse outside Albany that I swore I would never see again. I drove through a snowstorm on the evening of December 24th, Route 9 disappearing into a wall of white ahead of my headlights. The family farmhouse sits about 40 miles from the city, this massive Victorian structure my great-grandfather built when he emigrated from Poland in the 1920s. 3 stories of dark wood and strange angles, a house that always seemed to be watching you no matter which window you looked at. I pulled into the gravel driveway around 6 and counted the cars already there. My mother's old Buick, a silver pickup I did not recognize, Aunt Francine's black Mercedes, and a beat-up Jeep that had to belong to Wade. My family is not the kind that hugs at the door and says they missed you. We are the kind that holds grudges across generations, that remembers every slight and perceived insult, that communicates through cold silences and glances sharp enough to draw blood. Uncle Ray had been the only one who tried to keep us civilized, who made phone calls on birthdays and forced us into the same room once a year. Now he was gone, and somehow his death had pulled us all back together, like gravity dragging debris toward a black hole. I sat in my car with the engine running, watching shadows move behind the yellow-lit windows, and tried to remember how to breathe. My mother opened the front door before I even reached the porch steps, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know about how this night was going to go. She had aged badly in the years since I last saw her, deep lines around her mouth, gray streaking through hair that used to be auburn, a thinness to her frame that made her look brittle. "Elliot," she said, not moving to embrace me, just stepping aside to let me into the hallway. "You came." The way she said it made it sound like an accusation rather than a greeting. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. Old wood, dust, and something underneath that I could never quite identify, like copper or rust. I heard voices from the dining room, low and tense, and my mother grabbed my arm before I could move toward them. "Your uncle's death," she whispered, her fingers digging into my sleeve. "Do not bring it up, do not ask questions. Just get through dinner and then we can talk privately." She released me and walked toward the kitchen without another word, leaving me standing alone in the hallway with my suitcase and a growing sense that I had made a terrible mistake by coming here. The dining room was a museum of family dysfunction frozen in time. Aunt Francine sat at one end of the long oak table, her jewelry catching the chandelier light, her face arranged into an expression of polite contempt. She was my father's sister, and she had never forgiven my mother for marrying him, for reasons that shifted depending on who you asked. Across from her sat Uncle Teddy, Ray's younger brother, a heavy man with red-rimmed eyes who was already working on what looked like his third or fourth glass of whiskey. My cousin Wade stood by the window, 23 years old and looking like he had not slept in weeks, his flannel shirt untucked and his beard grown wild. There was a woman I did not recognize sitting near the fireplace, mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back tight, watching everyone with the sharp attention of someone cataloging details for later use. "That is Gail," Wade said when he noticed me staring. "Uncle Ray's girlfriend, or whatever she was." The woman named Gail did not react to this, just kept watching, her hands folded in her lap. Nobody stood up to greet me. Nobody smiled. The tension in that room was so thick it felt like walking into water, and I understood immediately that whatever had brought us all here, it was not grief. Dinner began at 7, and for the first hour we performed the rituals of a normal family gathering while pretending not to hate each other. My mother brought out the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the green bean casserole that nobody ever ate. Aunt Francine made small talk about her vacation home in Florida. Uncle Teddy poured himself another whiskey and stared at his plate without eating. Wade kept checking his phone under the table, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. And Gail just watched. She barely touched her food, barely spoke, but her eyes moved from face to face like she was solving a puzzle none of us could see. I tried to ask about Uncle Ray once, just a simple question about the funeral arrangements, and the entire table went silent. My mother shot me a look that could have frozen boiling water. "The funeral was private," Aunt Francine said, her voice clipped and final. "Ray wanted it that way." I noticed that she said wanted, not would have wanted, as if Ray had somehow planned his own death. The conversation moved on to safer topics, the weather, the stock market, Wade's job at the auto shop, but the silence around Ray's name hung over us like smoke that would not clear. Around 9 o'clock, Uncle Teddy finally broke. He had been drinking steadily since I arrived, his face growing redder with each glass, and I could see something building behind his eyes like pressure in a sealed container. We were sitting in the living room by then, spread across the old couches and armchairs, pretending to enjoy coffee and pie while the snow piled up outside the windows. "I want to know," Teddy said suddenly, his words slurring together. "Which one of you did it?" The room went absolutely still. My mother set down her coffee cup with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "Teddy," she said, her voice carrying a warning. "Not tonight." But Teddy was beyond warnings now. He stood up, swaying slightly, and pointed a thick finger at Aunt Francine. "You hated him. You hated him because he knew what you did with Dad's money after he died. You think I forgot about that?" Francine's face turned to stone, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but fear. "Sit down, Theodore," she said. "You are embarrassing yourself." But Teddy was not finished. He turned that accusing finger toward Gail, toward my mother, toward Wade. "One of you killed my brother," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "And I am not leaving this house until I find out who." What happened next is still a blur in my memory, pieces of motion and shouting that I have tried to reconstruct 100 times since that night. Aunt Francine stood up so fast, her chair tipped backward and crashed against the floor. Wade moved toward his father like he was going to restrain him. but Teddy shoved him away with surprising strength. My mother was saying something, her voice high and panicked, but I could not make out the words over the blood rushing in my ears. And then Gail spoke for the first time since dinner, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "He is right," she said. Everyone stopped, turned toward her. She was still sitting in the same chair by the fireplace, her hands still folded, her face completely calm. Ray did not die of a heart attack. The coroner's report was falsified. I have a copy and I have been waiting to see which one of you would crack first. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers. Someone in this room poisoned him, slowly, over several weeks. And Ray knew it was happening. He knew, and he asked me to help him find out who before it was too late. She looked at each of us in turn, and when her eyes met mine, I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That is why you are all here. Not because of his will, because of his list." I tried to leave after that. I think we all did. But when Wade went to the front door, he found it locked from the outside. Not just locked, but barricaded. A heavy chain wrapped through the handles that had not been there when I arrived. The back door was the same. The windows on the first floor had been nailed shut from the outside, fresh wood bright against the old frames. Someone had prepared this house like a trap, and we had all walked right into it. "This is insane," Wade kept saying, yanking at the front door until the hinges groaned. "This is absolutely insane." My mother had gone pale, leaning against the hallway wall like she might collapse. Aunt Francine was on her phone, but there was no signal. I checked mine too, and found the same thing, 0 bars, the little icon spinning uselessly as it searched for a connection. "The storm," Teddy muttered, but I did not believe that. The storm might have knocked out the cell towers, but it did not explain the chains on the doors. It did not explain the nails in the window frames. Someone had planned this, someone who knew we would all be here tonight. And as I looked around at my family, at their frightened faces, their suspicious eyes, I realized that the person responsible might be standing right next to me. Gail spread the contents of the manila envelope across the dining room table, and we gathered around it like mourners at a grave. There were medical records, bank statements, photographs, handwritten notes in Ray's cramped script that I recognized from the birthday cards he used to send me. The coroner's report showed cause of death as cardiac arrest, but attached to it was a toxicology screen that told a different story. Elevated levels of digoxin, a heart medication that Ray had never been prescribed. In small doses, it would have mimicked the symptoms of a weak heart. In larger doses, accumulated over weeks, it would have killed him. "He started feeling sick in October," Gail said, her finger tracing the dates on one of the documents. "Dizzy spells, nausea, confusion. His doctor could not find anything wrong, but Ray was a careful man. He saved samples of everything he ate and drank for the last month of his life, and he had them tested privately." She pulled out another sheet, a lab report showing digoxin traces in a bottle of whiskey, the same brand I could see sitting on the sideboard right now. Someone was dosing his liquor, someone who had access to this house, to his things, to his trust. She looked up at us, and there was something almost like satisfaction in her expression. Ray narrowed it down to 5 people, the 5 people in this room, not counting myself. The accusations came fast after that, years of buried resentment erupting like infection from a wound. Aunt Francine turned on my mother first, her voice shaking with fury. "You were here every week. You brought him groceries. You cleaned his house. You had more access than anyone." My mother fired back without hesitation. "I loved Ray. I was the only one who visited him after your husband left, and you were too ashamed to show your face. Where were you, Francine, when he needed family?" Wade started shouting about money, about how Ray had promised to help him buy into a business partnership, and then suddenly changed his mind 2 months before he died. Uncle Teddy threw a glass against the wall, whiskey and shattered crystal spraying across the floor, screaming that he would kill whoever did this with his bare hands. And through all of it, Gail just watched, her eyes moving from person to person, cataloging every reaction. I stayed quiet, pressed against the wall near the doorway, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. These were people I had known my entire life, people who had held me as a baby and attended my high school graduation. The idea that one of them could be a murderer seemed impossible. But someone had locked us in this house. Someone had poisoned that whiskey, and someone, I was starting to realize, had specifically made sure that I would be here tonight to witness whatever was about to happen. It was Wade who finally turned on me, his face twisted with something between fear and accusation. "Why are you even here, Elliot? You have not talked to any of us in years. You did not come to Thanksgiving, you did not come to Grandma's funeral. But suddenly Uncle Ray dies, and you drive through a blizzard to show up." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Gail cut in before I could speak. "Because Ray asked for him specifically," she said, pulling one last document from the envelope. "This is a letter Ray wrote 2 weeks before he died. He wanted Elliot here because Elliot is the only one he trusted to be impartial. The only one with no stake in his money, no old grudges, no reason to want him dead." She handed me the letter, and I recognized Ray's handwriting immediately. The same cramped letters from all those birthday cards, but shakier now, weaker. The letter explained everything. Ray knew he was dying, he knew someone in the family was responsible, and he wanted me to find out who, because I was the only one who had stayed away long enough to see clearly. "You are my witness, Elliot," the letter said. "You are the one who can look at this family without all the history clouding your eyes. Find the truth. Make them answer for what they did to me." My hands trembled as I read those words, and I understood finally why my mother's voice had sounded so strange on the phone. She had known. They had all known that Ray was setting a trap, and I was the bait. The confrontation that followed lasted until almost midnight, and by the end of it, the truth had come out in pieces, ugly, jagged pieces that cut everyone they touched. It was Aunt Francine. Not acting alone, but with help from my mother, the two of them working together despite decades of hatred because they shared one thing in common: desperation. Francine had embezzled nearly $200,000 from my grandfather's estate after he died, money that Ray had discovered and threatened to expose. My mother had been helping her hide it, taking a cut in exchange for her silence, using it to pay off debts she had never told anyone about. When Ray started asking questions, started pulling bank records and making phone calls, they panicked. The digoxin was Francine's idea. She had a prescription for her own heart condition, and she knew how to make it look natural. My mother provided the access, visiting Ray every week, bringing groceries, replacing his whiskey bottles with the poisoned ones Francine prepared. They thought no one would ever know. They thought Ray would just slip away quietly like an old man dying of a weak heart. But Ray had been smarter than them, more careful, and even from beyond the grave he had found a way to make them face what they had done. Gail had called the police before any of us arrived. That was the final piece of Ray's plan. She had contacted the state police that morning, given them copies of all the evidence, and told them exactly when and where to find us. The chains on the doors, the nails in the windows, those had been her doing too, installed while we were all distracted with dinner, a way to make sure nobody could run before the truth came out. The officers arrived around 1 in the morning, their cars cutting through the snow with lights flashing blue and red against the white drifts. I watched from the living room window as they cut through the chains, as they came inside, and read my mother and Aunt Francine their rights. My mother did not look at me as they led her out. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her face empty, like something inside her had finally broken. Francine was crying, ugly heaving sobs that shook her whole body, but I could not find any sympathy for her. I kept thinking about Uncle Ray, about those birthday cards he sent every year even when I never called him back, about how he died slowly over weeks knowing that the people killing him were the same people who were supposed to love him. He deserved better than this family. He deserved so much better. I drove back to Boston 2 days later after giving my statement to the police and watching the house get sealed as a crime scene. Wade and I shared a meal at a diner off the highway before I left, neither of us saying much, both of us trying to process what our family had become. Uncle Teddy checked himself into a facility for his drinking. The shock of everything had finally pushed him to admit he needed help. Gail disappeared after the arrests, and I never found out what happened to her or what her relationship with Ray had really been. Maybe she loved him. Maybe she was just someone he hired to execute his final plan. I do not know, and at this point, I am not sure it matters. My mother is serving 12 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Aunt Francine got 15. I have not visited either of them, and I do not think I ever will. Sometimes I take out that letter Ray wrote me, the one asking me to be his witness, and I read it again just to remind myself that someone in my family once thought I was worth trusting. That Christmas was 7 years ago now, and I still cannot hear carols on the radio without feeling sick to my stomach. But I found the truth, just like Ray asked me to. I gave him that much at least. I gave him justice, even if I lost everything else in the process. My cubicle on the 5th floor looked like every other desk in our Philadelphia marketing firm that December. Cheap tinsel taped to the partition walls, a sad little fake tree someone bought at the dollar store, candy canes nobody wanted sitting in a bowl. I had just turned 26 a month before, still getting used to being a real adult, with a steady job and a one-bedroom apartment in Fishtown that I shared with my cat Gus, this judgmental gray tabby, who stared at me like I disappointed him daily. My routine was painfully predictable in the best way. Catch the train downtown, spend 8 hours editing promotional copy, train home, feed Gus, scroll through Netflix until I passed out. I barely existed online, maybe an Instagram story once a week, a random tweet here and there complaining about SEPTA delays. I liked being anonymous, just another face in a city of millions where nobody really pays attention to anyone. That comfortable invisibility was something I treasured without realizing it. I had no reason to think anyone noticed me at all, let alone tracked my movements, memorized my habits, studied me like I was something to be figured out. The first package arrived on my desk December 18, 2023, and it shattered every assumption I had about being invisible. It was waiting for me after lunch, sitting right next to my keyboard like someone had placed it there with care. Emerald green wrapping paper, a gold satin ribbon tied in a perfect bow, the kind of gift presentation that takes effort, that someone spends time on. A small tag attached read, "For Natalie," in neat handwriting, almost calligraphy. I asked Denise in the cubicle next to mine if she saw who dropped it off, but she had been in a meeting all morning. I figured it was a vendor gift, maybe someone being friendly before the holidays. The wrapping was too pretty to tear, so I slid my finger under the seams carefully and opened the box inside. A burgundy cashmere scarf, incredibly soft, clearly expensive. For about 3 seconds, I thought it was a lovely gesture from someone. Then I recognized it. Not a similar scarf, that exact scarf. Same brand, same deep wine color, same delicate fringe pattern at the ends. I had worn one identical to it that very morning on my commute, pulled it off when I reached the warm office and stuffed it in my bag. I dug through my purse with slightly unsteady hands and pulled out my scarf, held them together. They matched perfectly. I sat there for a full minute trying to convince myself it was just a popular item, a coincidence, nothing to freak out about. I shoved both scarves in my desk drawer and went back to work. I wish I'd listened to that knot forming in my chest instead of ignoring it. The second package came 2 days later, December 20th, same beautiful wrapping, same careful handwriting on the tag. This time I didn't open it at my desk. I took it to the break room where nobody was around and sat down at the corner table, my coffee going cold beside me. Inside the box was a bottle of perfume, Chloe Nomad, the exact one I had sampled at Sephora 3 weeks earlier on a random Saturday. I remembered that day clearly because I had posted an Instagram story about it. Just a quick clip of me spraying it on my wrist with a caption saying something stupid like, "Treat myself" or "Nah." I never bought it. Too expensive for my budget, and I deleted the story after 24 hours like they all do. But someone had seen it, remembered it, gone out and purchased a full bottle just to give to me anonymously. My mind started racing through possibilities. A coworker who followed me online, maybe someone from college I forgot about, an old acquaintance being weird but harmless. I wanted so badly for there to be a normal explanation. I checked my Instagram followers, scrolled through the list of 200-something people, and nobody stood out as suspicious. Everyone looked familiar enough. Friends of friends, people from high school. A few random accounts I must have accepted without thinking. I went to building security that afternoon, feeling a little embarrassed, like I was overreacting. The guard at the front desk was this older guy named Vince who always said good morning to everyone. I showed him the gifts, explained the situation, and watched his face shift from concern to something closer to amusement. He said it sounded like a secret admirer, probably someone in the building who had a crush but was too shy to say anything directly. Told me it was actually kind of sweet if I thought about it. I wanted to argue, to explain that sweet would be leaving a card or asking me to coffee, not replicating my exact belongings and tracking my social media. But I felt stupid, like maybe I was being paranoid and dramatic. Vince said he would keep an eye out, check the visitor logs, see if anyone unfamiliar had been coming to our floor. He wrote down my name and extension in a little notebook and promised to call if he noticed anything. I thanked him and went back to my desk feeling worse than before. Not better. There is something uniquely isolating about being scared and having someone tell you there is nothing to be scared of. It makes you question your own instincts. Wonder if you are the crazy one. I spent the rest of that day looking at every man in the office differently, studying their faces when they walked past my cubicle, searching for some sign that one of them was watching me back. December 22nd was the day everything changed from unsettling to terrifying. The third package was larger than the others, flat and rectangular like a picture frame. Same green paper, same gold ribbon, same elegant tag with my name. I took it to the bathroom this time, locked myself in a stall and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a piece of paper, the kind kids use in elementary school, thick and slightly textured. On it was a drawing done in crayon, clearly made by a child based on the wobbly lines and simple shapes. But what the drawing showed made me grab the stall wall to keep myself upright. It was a floor plan of my apartment. Not a rough guess, an accurate layout showing my front door, the living room, the kitchen to the left, the bathroom, my bedroom in the back. Whoever drew this knew where my couch sat, where my small dining table was positioned, even the window by my bed. Red arrows pointed to different spots with labels in adult handwriting, neat and precise. Front door, deadbolt only by the entrance. Fire escape, window unlocked, by my bedroom. Back entrance, too easy, near the small door in my kitchen that led to the building's shared hallway. I read those words over and over, my brain refusing to process what they meant. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone had studied how to get in, and they had a child draw it for them like some kind of sick project. I called in sick the next day, December 23rd, and went straight to the police station near my apartment. The officer who took my report was a woman around my age named Colleen, and she at least seemed to take me seriously. I showed her the gifts, explained the timeline, handed over the drawing with the arrows and labels. She examined everything carefully, asked me questions about ex-boyfriends, anyone I had rejected recently, neighbors who acted strange. I had nothing useful to give her. My last relationship ended over a year ago and it was mutual, no drama. I barely knew my neighbors beyond polite nods in the hallway. Colleen said they would file a report and increase patrols around my block, but without a direct threat or a suspect, there was not much else they could do. She suggested I change my locks, maybe stay with a friend for a few days, keep my phone charged and nearby at all times. I asked her about the drawing, about the fact that someone had clearly been inside my home, and she said it could have been made from looking through windows or even studying the building's layout from public records. She was trying to be reassuring, but I could see something in her eyes that told me she was disturbed too. Before I left, she gave me her card and told me to call immediately if anything else happened. I appreciated her kindness, but walked out of that station feeling completely alone, like I was fighting something invisible that nobody else could see or touch. I spent the rest of December 23rd making my apartment as secure as I possibly could. Called a locksmith who charged me almost $300 to install new deadbolts on both doors and add a chain lock to the front entrance. I bought a cheap security camera online with same-day delivery and set it up in my living room facing the front door. Checked every single window, locked them all, even wedged wooden dowels in the tracks so they could not be forced open from outside. I pushed my heavy bookshelf in front of the kitchen door that led to the shared hallway, the one the drawing had labeled "Too Easy." Gus watched me move furniture around like I had lost my mind, meowing in confusion at the chaos. My mom called that evening to confirm Christmas plans, and I lied. Told her I was feeling under the weather and might not make the drive to her place in Lancaster. I could not explain any of this to her without causing a panic, and part of me still hoped it would just stop, that whoever was doing this would get bored and move on. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the old building made me sit up in bed, heart pounding, staring at my bedroom door. I kept my phone on the pillow next to me with Colleen's number saved and 911 ready to dial. The hours crawled by like something heavy dragging itself across the floor. Christmas Eve morning came gray and cold, the sky outside my window threatening snow that the forecast had been predicting all week. I made coffee and sat on my couch with Gus curled up beside me, watching the security camera feed on my phone, even though I was sitting right there in the same room it was recording. Nothing had happened overnight. The new locks were untouched, the windows still sealed, the bookshelf still blocking the back door. For a few hours I let myself believe that maybe the locksmith and the police report had been enough, that whoever this was had realized I was taking it seriously and decided to back off. I even texted my mom saying I was feeling better and would try to come for dinner the next day. Around noon I took a shower, the first time I had relaxed in days, letting the hot water wash away some of the tension knotted in my shoulders and neck. I remember thinking that I was going to be okay, that the worst was probably over. I dried off, got dressed in comfortable clothes, and walked back into my living room ready to spend a quiet day watching holiday movies and pretending everything was normal. That is when I saw it. Sitting on my coffee table right next to the mug I had left there an hour before was a gift wrapped in emerald green paper with a gold ribbon tied in a perfect bow. I did not scream. I did not run. I just stood there in my hallway with wet hair dripping onto my shoulders, staring at that box like it might explode if I moved. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I walked slowly toward the coffee table, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of how this was possible. The front door was still locked, chain still in place. I checked the windows without touching them, all sealed, dowels still wedged in the tracks. The bookshelf was exactly where I had pushed it against the kitchen door. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera footage, rewinding through the last hour with shaking fingers. Nothing. The camera showed my empty living room, Gus sleeping on the couch, no movement at all until I appeared on screen walking out of the bathroom. But the gift was there. It was right there on my table in a spot the camera should have captured perfectly, and the footage showed nothing being placed there. I watched it 3 times, 4 times, looking for a glitch, a skip, anything that would explain how a package materialized in my locked apartment without being recorded. The timestamp ran continuously with no gaps. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like the rules of how the world worked had suddenly stopped applying to my life. I should have called the police right then. I should have grabbed Gus and run out the door and never looked back. But there was something pulling me toward that box, some horrible need to know what was inside after everything I had been through. I sat down on the couch and pulled the gift onto my lap, my whole body vibrating with fear. The wrapping paper felt the same as all the others, smooth and expensive. I pulled the ribbon loose and tore through the paper without caring about being careful anymore. Inside was a white cardboard box, and inside that was tissue paper folded neatly around something solid. I peeled back the tissue and felt my entire chest seize up when I recognized what I was looking at. It was a knife from my own kitchen, the large chef's knife I used to chop vegetables, the one that should have been sitting in the block on my counter. I turned to look at my kitchen and saw the empty slot where the knife belonged. Whoever had been in my apartment took my own knife, wrapped it like a Christmas present, and left it for me to find. Tucked beneath the blade was a small card, the same creamy paper and elegant handwriting as all the tags before. I pulled it out and read the words printed there in perfect script. I chose the perfect gift. I just needed to test how close I could get. I called 911 and 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. They searched my entire apartment, checked the roof access, questioned neighbors, examined every possible entry point. Nothing was forced, nothing was broken, no signs of tampering with the locks I had just paid to install. One of the officers, a guy named Danny who looked almost as unnerved as I felt, suggested that maybe someone had a key from before I changed the locks and made a copy. But I had watched the locksmith install completely new hardware, not just rekey the existing locks. The frames were untouched. The windows had not been opened. They took the knife and the note as evidence, dusted for fingerprints on the box and wrapping paper, and told me they would be in contact. Colleen showed up about an hour later, off duty but concerned after hearing the dispatch. She helped me pack a bag and drove me to my mom's house in Lancaster herself, not wanting me to take the train alone. I spent Christmas Day jumping at every sound, unable to eat, unable to explain to my confused mother why I looked like I had not slept in a week. I told her there had been a break-in and I was shaken up. She did not push for details and I was grateful for that. Gus sat on my lap the entire day, sensing something was wrong, refusing to leave my side. The investigation went nowhere. No fingerprints on anything except mine. No suspicious footage from nearby businesses or traffic cameras. No witnesses who saw anyone entering or leaving my building. The police interviewed everyone in my office, everyone in my apartment complex, even tracked down a few of my Instagram followers who lived in the Philadelphia area. Nothing. Whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid being seen, how to move through my life without leaving a trace. I never went back to that apartment. Had movers pack up my stuff while I stayed in Lancaster with my mom. Eventually found a new place across the city with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. It has been almost a year now, and nothing else has happened. No gifts, no notes, no signs that anyone is watching me. But I still check my locks 4 times before bed. I still look at every stranger on the train wondering if they know things about me they should not. I never found out who it was, or why they chose me or what they were testing for. That last part haunts me the most, that word, testing. Like I was phase 1 of something bigger, like they were practicing before moving on to whatever comes next. Sometimes I wonder if they found someone else to watch, someone who does not know yet that their invisibility is just an illusion. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder if they ever really stopped watching me at all. My brother Craig and I had spent years promising each other we would fix what time and distance had broken. After graduating in 2009 and drifting apart through jobs, failed relationships, and the kind of silence that grows between siblings who forget how to talk, we finally made a real commitment. December 2024 was supposed to be our reset. Our parents were both gone. Dad from a stroke when I was still finishing school. Mom 4 years later from pneumonia that took her faster than any of us expected. And Craig was the only family I had left. I stood in my kitchen in Cedar Falls, Iowa that morning, sliding cinnamon rolls into the oven while my phone sat propped against the coffee maker, waiting for the text that would tell me he had left Minneapolis. He was supposed to arrive by noon. By 1, I assumed he had stopped for coffee somewhere. By 3, I figured traffic or a flat tire. By 6, when darkness had swallowed the Iowa plains and those cinnamon rolls sat cold and untouched, I knew in my gut that something had gone terribly wrong. Craig was not the type to vanish. Craig called if he was going to be 5 minutes late. That was just who he was. I dialed the police around 7:30, standing by my window and watching the snow fall in thick sheets across the empty street. The dispatcher who answered sounded like she had already handled dozens of similar calls that week. her voice flat and mechanical as she asked for his name, his age, his vehicle description. I gave her everything: Craig Weston, 41, driving a dark blue Subaru Outback with Minnesota plates, and waited for her to tell me what to do next. Instead, she explained that adults disappear during the holidays all the time, that people change their minds about family gatherings, that sometimes they just need a break. I wanted to scream at her that Craig did not need a break, that Craig had driven 4 hours specifically because he wanted to be here. But my voice came out steady and calm in a way that surprised me. She told me to wait 48 hours before filing an official report, standard procedure, and wished me a Merry Christmas before hanging up. I stood there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone while the Christmas tree lights blinked their stupid, cheerful colors against the wall. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the couch and called his number every 15 minutes until the battery on my phone dropped to single digits, and every single time it went to voicemail, his familiar voice asking me to leave a message. The package arrived on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, dropped on my doorstep by a mail carrier who had no idea what he was delivering. I almost did not notice it at first. A plain brown padded envelope with no return address, my name and address printed in neat block letters that looked like they had come from a standard office printer. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, assuming it was a late holiday gift from some distant relative or maybe something Craig had ordered for me before he disappeared. When I tore it open and tipped the contents onto the counter, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. His wallet landed first, the brown leather one I had given him 3 birthdays ago, worn soft at the edges from years in his back pocket. Then his watch, a silver Seiko with a scratched face that had belonged to our father. And finally, a single sheet of paper, a grainy black and white photograph printed on regular copy paper, showing what was unmistakably his Subaru pulled onto the shoulder of a dark highway, headlights still on, timestamp in the corner reading December 24th, 2024, 2:14 a.m. I called the police again, and this time they listened. 2 officers showed up at my house within the hour, a man and a woman who introduced themselves as Detective Ruiz and Detective Ames, and the way their faces changed when I showed them the contents of that envelope told me everything I needed to know. This was not a man who had decided to skip Christmas with his sister. This was something else entirely. Detective Ruiz, a stocky man with gray at his temples and deep lines around his mouth, asked me to walk him through everything again from the beginning while his partner photographed the wallet, the watch, the printed image. He asked if Craig had any enemies, any debts, any reason someone might want to hurt him. And I shook my head at every question because Craig was the most boring person I knew in the best possible way. He worked as an accountant, paid his taxes early, called our mom every Sunday until the day she died. He did not have enemies. He had a small apartment in Minneapolis, a cat named Oliver, and a standing reservation at the same Thai restaurant every Friday night. Detective Ames picked up the photograph with gloved fingers and studied it closely, her brow furrowing as she examined the timestamp. She asked me if I recognized the highway, and I told her I did not, but something in her expression made me think she did. 3 days later, Detective Ames called me at 6 in the morning and asked if I could come down to the station. Her voice had a different quality than before, tight and careful, like she was choosing every word deliberately. When I arrived, she led me to a small conference room where a corkboard had been set up against the wall, covered in photographs and maps and red string connecting points I did not yet understand. She sat me down and told me that the highway in the photograph was a rural stretch of Route 63, about 40 miles south of Rochester, Minnesota, a lonely corridor of farmland and forest that Craig would have taken as a shortcut to avoid holiday traffic on the interstate. Then she told me something that made the room feel like it was spinning. Over the past 5 years, 4 other people had disappeared along that same stretch of highway, all of them on Christmas Eve, all of them traveling alone. A sales representative from Duluth in 2018, a nursing student from Eau Claire in 2015, a retired teacher from Sioux Falls in 2016, a truck driver from Fargo in 2017. All of them had vanished without a trace, their vehicles found abandoned on the shoulder with signs of abrupt stops, keys still in the ignition, personal belongings left behind, no evidence of where they had gone or why they had pulled over in the first place. I sat there staring at that corkboard, at the faces of 4 strangers who had driven down the same road my brother had driven, on the same night my brother had driven it, and I felt something cold settle into my chest. Detective Ames explained that the cases had never been connected before because they crossed multiple jurisdictions, different counties, different states, different law enforcement agencies who had each treated them as isolated incidents. A man decides to walk away from his life on Christmas Eve, starts fresh somewhere new, happens more often than people think. But now, with the package that had arrived at my door, everything had changed. Whoever had taken Craig wanted me to know. Wanted someone to know. The photograph, the wallet, the watch. It was not a ransom demand or a taunt. It was a signature. Detective Ames looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of professional detachment and something that looked almost like fear. And she told me that they had contacted the FBI. This was no longer a missing persons case. This was a serial abduction investigation, and my brother was the 5th known victim of someone who had been hunting along that highway for half a decade, selecting people who were alone and vulnerable on the one night of the year when nobody would notice them missing until it was far too late. They found Craig's Subaru on January 2nd, hidden in a cluster of trees about 200 yards off the highway, down a dirt access road that led to an abandoned grain elevator. I was not there when they discovered it, but Detective Ames called me within the hour, and I could hear the strain in her voice as she described what they had found. The driver's side door was hanging open, the interior light long dead from draining the battery. There were deep gouges in the dashboard where something or someone had scratched at the plastic with enough force to leave marks. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, as if Craig had been trying to create distance between himself and something in front of him. And on the passenger seat, placed almost carefully, was his cell phone, the screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks but still intact. When the forensic team powered it on, they found that the last thing Craig had done before whatever happened to him was open his camera app. He had taken a photograph at 2:16 a.m. on Christmas Eve, 2 minutes after the highway camera had captured his car on the shoulder. The image was blurry, shot in darkness with the flash on, but you could make out a shape standing at the edge of the headlight beam. A figure in dark clothing, tall and thin, one arm raised as if waving him down. The FBI released that photograph to the media 3 days later, and within 48 hours, my brother's disappearance was national news. I remember sitting in my living room watching a CNN anchor describe the Christmas Eve highway abductions. That was what they were calling it now, a name that would be printed on magazine covers and documentary thumbnails for years to come, while a picture of Craig smiled out from the corner of the screen. They showed the blurry figure from his phone, enhanced and analyzed by experts who all agreed it appeared to be a male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like a heavy coat and some kind of hat or hood. Tip lines were flooded with calls. Amateur detectives on Reddit began mapping the previous disappearances, drawing circles and calculating distances, theorizing about hunting grounds and cooling off periods. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, true crime podcasters asking for exclusive access, distant relatives I had not spoken to in years suddenly desperate to reconnect. I stopped answering. I unplugged my landline and let my cell go to voicemail, and sat in the dark with the curtains drawn, watching the news cycle chew through my brother's life like it was content, like it was entertainment, like Craig was not a real person who had driven down a dark road to spend Christmas with his sister and never arrived. The break in the case came on January 15th, and it came from the most unexpected place. A woman named Beverly Tate, 67 years old, lived in a farmhouse about 3 miles from where they had found Craig's Subaru. She had been watching the news coverage like everyone else, and something about the blurry photograph from Craig's phone had nagged at her for days until she finally realized why it looked familiar. She called the FBI tip line and told them that she had seen that same figure on multiple occasions over the years. Always in December, always late at night, walking along the shoulder of Route 63 with a gas can in his hand. She had assumed he was a stranded motorist, had even thought about stopping to help once or twice. But something about the way he moved had always made her decide against it. He walked too slowly, she said, like he was waiting for something, like he wanted to be seen. The FBI showed her a series of photographs, and she identified a man named Roy Clement Sutter, 54, a former long-haul trucker who had lost his commercial license in 2012 after a string of traffic violations and had been living off disability checks in a rented cabin about 12 miles from the stretch of highway where all 5 victims had disappeared. When they raided Roy Sutter's cabin on January 17th, they found a nightmare. I was not supposed to know the details. Detective Ames had tried to shield me from the worst of it, but information leaks when a case gets this big. And I eventually learned what they had discovered in that small wooden structure at the end of a dirt road surrounded by nothing but frozen fields and silence. He had kept trophies, wallets, watches, jewelry, photographs, driver's licenses, one item from each of his victims, stored in labeled boxes on a shelf in his bedroom like a collection. Craig's wedding ring was there, the gold band he had kept wearing even after his divorce 3 years ago, because he said it reminded him that he had been loved once. They found journals too, decades of handwritten entries detailing what Roy Sutter called his Christmas tradition, his annual gift to himself. He had been doing this longer than anyone had realized. The 5 victims they knew about were only the ones from the past decade. There were references to others, names and dates stretching back to the late 90s, people who had vanished on Christmas Eve along rural highways across 3 states and whose disappearances had never been connected to anything at all. Roy Sutter killed himself before they could arrest him. The FBI had surrounded his cabin. Negotiators were on bullhorns asking him to come out peacefully, and he put a shotgun under his chin and pulled the trigger while they were still reading him his rights through a megaphone. I found out from a breaking news alert on my phone, sitting alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, because sleep had become something that happened to other people. I did not feel relief. I did not feel closure. I felt a rage so deep and so complete that I could not move for almost an hour. Just sat there with my phone in my lap while the screen dimmed and went dark. He had taken the easy way out. He had escaped the trial, the testimony, the lifetime in a cell where he would have had to face what he had done every single day. And worse than that, he had taken the answers with him. His journals referenced locations, burial sites, places where he had left his victims after he was finished with them, but the entries were written in a kind of personal shorthand that investigators were still trying to decode. They found the remains of 2 people in a root cellar beneath his cabin. Neither of them was Craig. The others, including my brother, were still out there somewhere in the frozen Minnesota countryside, hidden in places only Roy Sutter had known. They recovered Craig's body in March, after the snow melted, and a farmer noticed disturbed earth at the edge of his property line about 8 miles from Sutter's cabin. I identified him by the scar on his left forearm, the one he had gotten when we were kids, and he had fallen through a glass coffee table trying to catch me during a game of tag. The medical examiner said he had died from blunt force trauma to the head, probably within hours of his abduction, which meant he had not suffered long. I do not know if that is supposed to make me feel better. I buried him next to our parents in the cemetery outside Cedar Falls, on a gray afternoon in early April when the trees were just starting to bud, and the world was moving on like it always does. The case is still technically open. They have identified 11 victims in total now, spanning almost 3 decades, and there may be more they will never find. I get calls sometimes from journalists working on retrospectives, from documentary filmmakers who want to interview the sister of victim number 5, from true crime writers who think my grief would make a compelling chapter in their books. I say no to all of them. Craig was not a chapter. Craig was my brother, the only family I had left, and he died alone on a frozen highway on Christmas Eve because he wanted to spend the holiday with me. I think about that every single day. I think about him pulling over because he saw what looked like a stranded motorist with a gas can, because that is exactly the kind of person Craig was, the kind who stopped to help. And I think about Roy Sutter standing there in the dark, waiting, knowing that someone like my brother would come along eventually. Someone kind, someone alone, someone who would not be missed until it was already too late. Cedar Falls is one of those tiny towns you drive through without really noticing. The kind of place with a single traffic light and a diner that probably hasn't changed its menu since the 80s. My coworker had been telling me for weeks about their annual holiday festival, how they shut down the main street and transform it into this winter wonderland with wooden stalls, carolers, and enough hot cocoa to drown in. My boyfriend was visiting his parents that weekend, and I had nothing planned, so I figured why not. It was early December, a Saturday, and the drive from my apartment took about 40 minutes through these winding country roads lined with bare trees and old farmhouses. I graduated the same year the economy crashed, spent years bouncing between jobs, and had only recently started feeling like my life was finally on track. A solo trip to a small-town festival felt like exactly the kind of simple, peaceful day I deserved. I parked 2 blocks from the main square because every spot closer was taken, and as soon as I stepped out of my car, I could hear holiday music echoing from speakers mounted on the lampposts. The first couple of hours were exactly what I needed. I walked through the stalls, bought a handmade ornament for my mom, and got myself one of those giant soft pretzels with cheese dip. There were families everywhere, kids running around, couples holding hands, elderly people sitting on benches watching the carolers perform near the gazebo. One thing I noticed pretty quickly was the number of Santas walking around. Not just one Santa sitting in a chair for photos, but maybe 6 or 7 of them spread throughout the festival, all wearing slightly different versions of the red suit. Some had real beards, some had obviously fake ones, and they were all carrying candy canes in little baskets, handing them out to kids and posing for pictures. I thought it was a cute idea at first, this whole army of Santas making the rounds. I even took a photo of 2 of them standing together near the hot chocolate stand and sent it to my boyfriend with a laughing emoji. I had no idea that one of those men in red suits would turn the rest of my day into something I still have nightmares about. It happened around 3 in the afternoon. I was standing near a stall that sold these beautiful hand-carved wooden angels, trying to decide if I should get one for my sister, when I felt someone step up right behind me. Too close. That kind of closeness that makes you immediately aware of your own body and the space around it. I turned and found myself face to face with one of the Santas. He was tall, probably 6'2" or 3, and his suit was a darker shade of red than the others, more like maroon. His beard looked real, gray and wiry, and he had these pale blue eyes that were staring directly at me without blinking. He was holding out a candy cane wrapped in cellophane, and he said something like, "A special treat from the North Pole, just for you." His voice was low, almost a whisper, which was weird because the other Santas I had seen were all doing this booming, jolly voice thing. I smiled politely and said, "No thank you," that I was good. He did not move. He just stood there, holding the candy cane about 6 inches from my face. I tried to step around him, but he shifted his body to block me. Not aggressively, not in a way that anyone watching would have noticed, but enough that I had to stop. He said I should take it, that he had picked it out especially for me. I remember looking around to see if anyone else was seeing this, but everyone was busy with their own shopping, their own conversations. A family walked right past us, and the dad even nodded at the Santa like he was part of the entertainment. I told him again, more firmly this time, that I did not want the candy cane. Something changed in his face then, just for a second. The smile stayed, but his eyes went flat, like a switch had been flipped. He leaned in closer and said, "You will regret not taking it." Then he straightened up, let out this loud theatrical laugh, and walked away into the crowd. My heart was pounding. I stood there for probably a full minute trying to convince myself that I had overreacted, that he was just some weird guy who took his Santa role too seriously. I decided to shake it off and keep enjoying the festival. I bought a cup of mulled cider and walked toward the gazebo where a group of teenagers were singing Silent Night in surprisingly good harmony. The sun was starting to get lower, and the temperature had dropped a few degrees, so I zipped my jacket all the way up and wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck. For about 20 minutes, I managed to forget about the Santa. I watched the carolers, clapped along with everyone else, and even chatted with an older woman next to me about how talented the kids were. Then I saw him again. He was standing on the opposite side of the gazebo, maybe 30 feet away, and he was looking directly at me. Not at the singers, not at the crowd, at me. He was completely still, both hands resting on the handle of a large red sack that sat on the ground next to him. When our eyes met, he raised one hand slowly and waved. Not a friendly wave, a slow, deliberate gesture, like he was making sure I knew he had found me again. I moved. I did not wave back, did not smile, just turned and walked as fast as I could without running toward the other end of the festival. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if I was being paranoid or if this guy was actually following me. There were hundreds of people here. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just stationed near the gazebo and happened to notice me. I stopped at a stall selling candles and pretended to look at the merchandise while checking behind me. He was not there. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. A woman behind the counter asked if I needed help, and I said no, just browsing, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. I bought a vanilla candle I did not want just to have an excuse to stand there longer and scan the crowd. No maroon suit, no pale blue eyes. I checked my phone and saw it was almost 5. The festival was supposed to go until 8, but I decided I had seen enough. I was going to head back to my car and go home. The walk to my car should have taken 5 minutes. The streets leading away from the main square were much quieter, with fewer lights and almost no people. Most of the visitors were still clustered around the stalls and the gazebo, enjoying the last few hours of daylight. I passed a closed hardware store, a small church with a nativity scene on the lawn, and a row of houses with their porch lights on. My car was parked on a side street called Birch Lane, underneath a big oak tree that had lost all its leaves. I could see it from the corner, my silver Corolla sitting there waiting for me. I was maybe 50 feet away when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps, boots on pavement. I did not turn around at first. I told myself it was just someone else leaving the festival, heading to their own car. But the footsteps matched my pace exactly. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I sped up, they sped up. My chest got tight, and I felt this cold wave wash through my whole body. I turned around. He was about 20 feet behind me, walking steadily in my direction. The maroon Santa suit looked darker in the fading light, almost brown. His white beard caught the glow from a nearby porch light. He was not smiling anymore. His face was completely blank, expressionless, and he was dragging that red sack behind him with one hand. The sack was heavy. I could tell by the way it scraped against the asphalt, by the way his arm was tensed from the weight. He stopped when I stopped. We just stood there, looking at each other in the middle of that empty street. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, like he was commenting on the weather. He said, "You forgot your treat." I did not respond. I could not. My legs felt like they were filled with concrete. He took another step forward, and that broke whatever spell was holding me in place. I spun around and ran the last 30 feet to my car, fumbling with my keys the whole way, nearly dropping them twice before I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. I slammed the door and hit the lock button so hard I thought I might break it. My fingers were trembling as I tried to get the key into the ignition. Through the windshield, I watched him approach. He was not running. He did not need to. He knew I was trapped in that car on that empty street with no one around to help. He walked right up to the driver's side window and stood there, looking down at me. Up close, I could see details I had missed before. His eyebrows were thick and unkempt. There was a small scar running through his upper lip. His eyes had this emptiness to them. like he was looking at an object instead of a person. He lifted the red sack with both hands and held it up so I could see it clearly. Then he swung it against my window. The impact made this deep, heavy thud that shook the whole door. Not the sound of fabric and candy canes, the sound of metal. Something solid and heavy was inside that sack. He swung again, and this time I saw a dent form in the door panel. I screamed. I finally got the key in the ignition and turned it, but my hand slipped off the steering wheel when he hit the window a third time. The glass did not break, but I could see a small crack forming in the corner. He was methodical about it, swinging the sack in a steady rhythm, each impact harder than the last. I threw the car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas without even looking behind me. The tires screeched, and I nearly hit a mailbox on the other side of the street. He stumbled back when the car lurched away from him, and for just a second I saw surprise on his face, like he had not expected me to actually get away. I shifted into drive and floored it, watching him shrink in my rearview mirror. He did not chase me. He just stood there in the middle of Birch Lane, holding that sack at his side, watching my car disappear around the corner. I drove straight to the police station without stopping, running 2 stop signs and probably a red light on the way. I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. When I got there, I practically fell out of my car and ran inside, trying to explain what had happened between sobs. The officer at the front desk looked at me like I had lost my mind. "A Santa tried to attack you with a bag of candy canes," she repeated back to me. I could hear how crazy it sounded. But then another officer, an older guy with gray hair and a tired face, came out from the back. He had been listening. He asked me to describe the man again. His height, his suit color, anything I could remember about his face. I told him everything. The maroon suit, the real beard, the pale blue eyes, the scar on his lip. When I mentioned the scar, the older officer exchanged a look with his colleague that made my stomach turn. He told me to sit down and wait, that they needed to check something. I sat in that plastic chair for almost an hour, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, sipping water from a paper cup. Officers kept walking past, talking in low voices, making phone calls. Finally, the older officer came back and sat down across from me. He told me that I was the 4th woman to report an incident involving a man dressed as Santa at the Cedar Falls Festival that day. The 4th. One woman said a Santa had grabbed her arm near the parking lot and tried to pull her toward a van before her husband intervened. Another said a Santa had followed her into a portable restroom area and blocked the exit until she screamed for help. A teenage girl reported that a Santa had offered her a ride home and became aggressive when she refused. They never caught him. That is the part that still keeps me awake at night. The festival had no official registration system for the volunteer Santas. Anyone could show up in a suit, grab a basket of candy canes from the welcome table, and blend right in. The police checked the area where I had parked, but he was long gone by then. They found scuff marks on the asphalt from my tires and a deep scratch on the driver's side door of my Corolla, but no fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing useful. The older officer told me they suspected the man had been using festivals like this one for years, moving from town to town during the holiday season, using the costume and the chaos as cover to select and approach women. He said they had similar reports from 2 other counties going back several years, but never enough evidence to identify a suspect. I moved away from that area a few months later, not because of the incident specifically, but it did not help. Every December now, when I see a Santa at the mall or ringing a bell outside a store, I look at his eyes first. I look for that emptiness. I look for that scar. I never found out who he was or what was really in that sack, but I know what he was planning. I know I was lucky. And I know that somewhere out there, he is probably still doing this, still walking through crowded festivals in that maroon suit, still picking out women who are alone, still asking them if they want a treat from the North Pole. Christmas Eve of 2017 was supposed to be my fresh start. After my divorce got finalized in September, I signed a lease on a one-bedroom unit in a quiet building on Crescent Avenue, one of those old brick complexes from the 60s with thick walls and radiator heating. My daughter Zoe had just turned 7 that fall, and she was spending the holiday with her mom and grandparents in Ohio, so I figured I would ride out the night alone with some takeout and a movie marathon. The building had 12 units spread across 3 floors, and most of my neighbors were older folks who traveled south for winter, or young professionals who went home to their families. By December 23rd, the parking lot was nearly empty. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, how the silence would help me reset and maybe even enjoy my own company for once. My buddies from college kept texting me to come over, but at 34, freshly divorced, I needed to prove to myself I could handle being alone. I spent most of that day unpacking the last few boxes I had been avoiding since the move. Kitchen stuff mostly, things my ex-wife let me keep because she never liked them anyway. Around 6 in the evening, I ordered Chinese food from the only place still delivering and settled into my couch with beef lo mein and a Bruce Willis movie. The radiator clanked and hissed in that comforting way old buildings do, and outside my window, a light snow started falling over the parking lot. I had one lamp on in the living room, the TV casting blue shadows across the walls, and for the first time in months I felt something close to okay. The food was mediocre, the movie was predictable, but I was warm and safe in my own space, building a life that belonged only to me. That small comfort would not last much longer. The first time I heard the doorknob rattle, it was around 9:30. I muted the TV and listened, figuring one of my neighbors had stumbled to the wrong floor after some holiday drinking. The building had no elevator, just a central stairwell, and the layout on each floor was identical, so it happened sometimes. I heard the knob turn left, then right, then a pause. Footsteps moved away, soft on the carpeted hallway, and I shrugged it off and went back to my movie. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same pattern, left turn, right turn, silence. This time I got up and walked to the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Nothing. I figured whoever it was had realized their mistake and gone home. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and told myself I was being paranoid, that the divorce had made me jumpy, that spending Christmas alone was messing with my head. The building was safe, the neighborhood was safe, and drunk people make mistakes. By 11, the doorknob had rattled 4 more times. The intervals were getting shorter, maybe 15 minutes apart, and the pattern never changed. Left turn, right turn, pause, footsteps fading. I started keeping the TV on mute, sitting in the dark with just the glow of the screen, waiting for the next attempt. Something about the repetition bothered me in a way I could not explain. A drunk person would knock, would call out, would realize the mistake and feel embarrassed. This was methodical, patient, like someone testing a lock they intended to open. Around 11:15, I finally worked up the nerve to look through the peephole. The hallway was lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered at the far end, casting everything in a sickly yellow tint. Standing directly in front of my door, maybe 2 feet away, was a man I had never seen before. He was not moving, not knocking, not doing anything. Just standing there, facing my door, head tilted slightly like he was listening for something on the other side. I stepped back from the peephole so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My heart was pounding in my ears and I had to press my palm against the wall to steady myself. The man looked to be in his 40s, with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb the hallway light rather than reflect it. He wore a dark green jacket, the kind you see at army surplus stores, and his hair was cropped short and uneven like he had cut it himself. What disturbed me most was his posture. There was no impatience in it, no frustration, no indication that he was lost or confused. He stood the way someone stands when they are waiting for a bus they know will come, relaxed and certain. I watched him through the peephole for what felt like 5 minutes, and he did not shift his weight, did not check his phone, did not glance down the hallway. He simply existed there, perfectly still, breathing in shallow little clouds that fogged the air in front of his face. I moved away from the door as quietly as I could and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. My first instinct was to call the building super, but I knew Victor had gone to visit his sister in Pennsylvania for the week. The security guard, an older guy named Douglas who usually sat at the front desk from 6 to midnight, was off for Christmas Eve. I remembered him mentioning it when I picked up a package earlier that week, joking about how nobody causes trouble on the holidays. I scrolled to 911 and hesitated, wondering if I was overreacting. The man had not threatened me, had not broken anything, had not even spoken. But I kept thinking about the doorknob, those patient little turns 6 times now, and the way he stood there like he had nowhere else to be. I pressed call. The dispatcher picked up after 3 rings, a tired woman who sounded like she had been answering calls all night. I explained the situation in a whisper, feeling ridiculous, expecting her to tell me to calm down. Instead, she took my address and asked if I had a way to barricade my door. That question told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she was taking this. She told me a patrol unit would be dispatched, but due to the volume of calls on Christmas Eve, the nearest available officer was handling an incident across town. The estimated response time was over an hour, possibly longer. She advised me to stay away from the door, keep my phone charged, and call back immediately if the situation escalated. I thanked her and hung up, then stood in the middle of my living room feeling completely helpless. An hour. 60 minutes of waiting in the dark, knowing that man was standing right outside my door. I dragged my couch across the floor as quietly as I could and wedged it against the front entrance, then stacked 2 kitchen chairs on top for good measure. It looked absurd, like something a child would build to keep out monsters, but it made me feel slightly better. I turned off every light in the apartment except for the bathroom, which had no windows, and sat on the floor with my back against the bathtub. From there, I could hear the front door clearly, and I would have time to react if something happened. For about 20 minutes, there was nothing. No footsteps, no rattling, no sound at all except the radiator and my own breathing. I started to wonder if he had left, if maybe the whole thing had been some bizarre misunderstanding after all. Then I heard it, a soft tapping on glass coming from the bedroom. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the bedroom window faced the back of the building where a rusted fire escape zigzagged down to the alley. I had never used it, never even opened that window since I moved in, but I knew it was there. The tapping came again, 3 light knocks spaced evenly apart, almost polite. I crawled out of the bathroom on my hands and knees, staying below the window line, and made my way to the bedroom doorway. The blinds were down but not fully closed, and through the gaps I could see a shadow moving on the fire escape. He had found another way. He was testing the window the same way he had tested the door, methodical and patient, looking for any weakness he could exploit. I called 911 again, my voice cracking as I explained that the man had moved to my fire escape. The same dispatcher answered, and I could hear the concern in her tone even through the professional calm. She told me the unit was still en route, maybe 45 minutes out now, and asked if I had anything to defend myself with. I thought about my kitchen, about the drawer with the cheap knives I had bought at a discount store, and realized I had left them on the other side of the apartment, past the bedroom window where the shadow kept moving. She stayed on the line with me, talking in a low, steady voice, asking me questions about the building layout, about other exits, about neighbors I could reach. I told her the truth, that the building was empty, that I was alone, that there was no one coming to help me. The tapping stopped. For a moment I thought maybe he had given up, but then I heard his footsteps on the metal grating of the fire escape, moving slowly toward the living room side of the building. He was circling, checking every possible entry point, and my apartment had 4 windows total. The living room window was larger than the bedroom one, a wide double-pane unit that looked out over the parking lot. I had never thought about it as a vulnerability before, just as a source of light and a decent view. Now I stared at it from across the room, watching the snow fall in the orange glow of the street lamp, waiting for his face to appear. The dispatcher was still talking, but I had stopped responding. Every nerve in my body focused on that rectangle of glass. When the tapping came, it was louder than before, more confident. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. I saw his silhouette rise into view from below, and I realized he had climbed from the fire escape onto the narrow ledge that ran along the building's exterior. He pressed his face close to the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside, and even though I was sitting in complete darkness, I knew he could not see me, but I could see him. His breath fogged the window in slow rhythmic pulses, and his eyes moved back and forth across the room, scanning for any sign of movement. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was something he had done many times before. I do not know what made me do it, but I stood up. Maybe it was the fear turning into something else. Maybe it was the realization that hiding was not going to save me. Or maybe I just wanted him to know I was there, that I was watching him too. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it directly at the window, directly at his face. For one horrible second, we made eye contact through the glass. His expression did not change, no surprise, no anger, nothing. He just looked at me the way you look at a locked door, an obstacle to be solved. Then he smiled, a small, quick movement of his lips, and raised one finger to point at the latch on the window. It was the old kind, a simple crescent lock that flipped up and down, and I had never checked if it was secure. I lunged across the room and slammed my palm against the latch, just as he pressed his weight against the frame. The window shuddered but held. He tried again, harder this time, and I heard the wood groan in protest. The dispatcher was shouting in my ear, asking what was happening, and I could not find the words to answer her. I just held the latch with both hands and pushed back against every attempt he made, feeling the vibrations travel up my arms each time he threw himself against the glass. Then, headlights. A car turned into the parking lot below, its high beams sweeping across the side of the building. The man stopped pushing and looked down, his face briefly illuminated in the white glare. I heard a car door open, then a voice, someone calling out in Spanish to a child in the back seat. One of my neighbors, coming home late from a family gathering, completely unaware of what was happening 2 floors above. The man on the ledge looked at me one more time, that same empty, evaluating stare, and then he was gone. He dropped down to the fire escape and descended so quickly and quietly that by the time I ran to the bedroom window, all I could see were footprints in the fresh snow leading toward the back alley. The police arrived 37 minutes later. They searched the building, the alley, the surrounding blocks, and found nothing. No fingerprints on the windows, no identification, no witnesses except for me. The officer who took my statement said it sounded like a professional, someone who targeted empty buildings during holidays, looking for easy entry points. He asked if anything had been stolen, and I almost laughed. The man never got inside. He never took anything from my apartment. But standing there in my living room at 2 in the morning on Christmas Day, surrounded by the furniture I had shoved against the door, I understood that he had taken something after all. I moved out 3 weeks later and never spent another night in that building. Sometimes I still think about him, about that patient smile, about how close he came, and I wonder how many other doors he has tried since then, and how many of them eventually opened. I hadn't seen most of my family in over 10 years. My name is Laura, and I'd been keeping my distance for a reason. My childhood memories are a mix of love and dread, mostly revolving around my younger cousin Zachary. He was the closest thing I had to a sibling growing up. When my parents passed away, I cut ties with my relatives. It was easier that way. But last December, I got an invitation to the family Christmas reunion. It felt like a strange sort of pull, like I had to go or something would always be unfinished. When I arrived at my aunt's house, it was like stepping into a time capsule. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, the lights twinkling on the tree, the old couch where my aunt always sat. But something was off. Everyone was polite, way too polite. My cousins, who I used to fight and laugh with, exchanged stiff pleasantries. Conversations felt forced, the kind of forced politeness that makes your skin crawl. But what struck me the most was the absence of Zachary. I hadn't seen him for years, and I remembered him so clearly, his messy hair, his constant jokes. Yet no one mentioned him. It was like he never existed. Around dinner, I quietly asked my cousin Hannah about Zachary, hoping for a simple answer. She froze for a second before saying he was busy with work, that he couldn't make it. But the hesitation in her voice, it didn't sit right. I tried asking the others, each time getting a different explanation. Uncle Bob claimed he was out of town. Aunt Marie said he was sick, but she didn't elaborate. And when I asked my older cousin Mark, he looked away, mumbling something about him getting his life together. The more they spoke, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on the truth. After midnight, I was sitting alone, staring at the flickering fireplace, when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was hushed at first, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. My aunt and uncle were arguing with Mark. It was about Zachary. They talked about last Christmas, about an argument that had escalated too far. That was when I learned that Zachary had gone missing that night, during a fight that turned physical. They buried it. The family buried it to protect someone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The truth was so twisted, so terrifying. As I stepped closer, I heard them realize I had overheard. The room fell silent. My aunt's voice, sharp and low, was the first to break the stillness. She demanded that I join the pact. At first, I didn't understand what that meant, but when she repeated it, her voice grew colder. No one was allowed to leave until I agreed to stay silent. I had to promise, forever, that I wouldn't speak of Zachary, of what happened. It was as if they were trying to trap me, to silence me for good. The threat in their eyes was unmistakable. They weren't asking me to keep quiet. They were warning me that if I didn't, I might never leave the house alive. The room felt smaller once they closed in around me, chairs scraping softly against the floor, as if no one wanted to make a sound loud enough to shatter whatever fragile agreement held them together. My aunt spoke calmly, almost gently, explaining how families survive by protecting themselves, how mistakes get buried for the greater good. She said Zachary had been unpredictable that night, that words were exchanged, that someone lost control. Each sentence sounded rehearsed, like they'd all practiced this explanation together. I noticed how carefully they avoided naming who actually touched him. My chest tightened as I realized every pause, every shared glance, was part of the same unspoken script. They weren't grieving him. They were guarding something, and now I was standing in the middle of it. I tried to say I needed air, that the night had gotten too heavy, but my uncle quietly turned the lock on the back door. No one raised their voice. That was the part that scared me the most. My cousin Mark stood near the hallway, blocking the path to the bedrooms, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Someone poured more wine into my glass without asking, the red liquid sloshing over the rim. They kept talking about tradition, about loyalty, about how silence had already saved them once. Every word felt like pressure building behind my eyes. It was clear they believed this wasn't cruelty. It was maintenance. As the clock crept deeper into the night, they began explaining the rules of this so-called pact. Nothing written down, nothing spoken outside the house, no sudden confessions born from guilt or anger. They reminded me that people disappear when stories get told the wrong way. One of them mentioned how easily accidents happen during winter, how isolated the house can feel when roads are empty and phones lose signal. I realized they weren't bluffing to scare me into compliance. They were offering me a place inside the lie, a seat at the table of denial. My mind kept circling back to Zachary's laugh, the way he used to drum his fingers on every surface. That sound felt impossibly far away now. Eventually, exhaustion set in, thick and disorienting, and they took that moment to push for an answer. My aunt reached for my hand, her grip firm despite her soft tone, asking me to promise I'd let the past stay buried. I nodded slowly, because arguing felt pointless and dangerous. The relief that washed over them was immediate and unsettling, like a storm passing too quickly. They unlocked the doors, poured themselves fresh drinks, and acted as if nothing unusual had happened. Inside, something broke quietly. I understood then that surviving the night meant carrying Zachary with me alone, in a way none of them ever would. The morning light felt wrong when it finally crept through the curtains, pale and weak, like it didn't belong in that house. Everyone acted lighter, almost cheerful, making coffee and setting out pastries as if the night before had been nothing more than an awkward conversation that needed sleep to smooth it over. No one mentioned Zachary again, not even a slip. I noticed small details that hadn't registered before. A crack in the kitchen tile that looked like it had been scrubbed too often, a faint dent in the hallway wall at shoulder height, framed photos rearranged so one space was oddly symmetrical but empty. These weren't new changes. They were careful ones. I left later that morning with hugs that lasted a second too long and smiles that felt carefully measured. No one followed me outside, but I felt watched until my car disappeared down the road. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time since arriving, I could breathe properly. I drove until my hands stopped clenching the steering wheel and pulled over just to sit there, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Part of me wanted to go straight to the authorities, to say everything out loud before fear could talk me out of it. Another part knew exactly what kind of people my family was when cornered. They'd already proven how far they were willing to go to protect one of their own. For weeks after, I barely slept. Every unknown number on my phone made my pulse jump. I replayed their voices in my head, the calm certainty with which they talked about silence, about consequences. I did try to look into Zachary on my own. I searched old records, scrolled through archived posts, asked distant relatives who hadn't been there that night. Most answers ended abruptly, conversations drying up the moment his name came up. One person admitted they'd been told he moved away suddenly and not to ask questions. That was when I understood how wide the lie spread, how many people had accepted it without ever knowing why. I haven't been back since, and I never will. I cut contact completely, changed my number, and moved far enough that the distance feels permanent. The truth is still heavy, still unresolved, but I chose the only kind of control I could take. I refused to be part of their pact beyond surviving it. Zachary exists in my memory, not theirs, and I won't let him vanish entirely just because it's more convenient for them. Writing this is the closest I'll come to saying his name out loud. If anything ever happens to me, I hope someone reads this and understands that some families don't break from tragedy. They seal it away and wait for it to surface again. That winter, our family decided to do something we'd always talked about but never actually done before. Cut our own Christmas tree on public land. Life at that point felt steady in a quiet, almost boring way, the kind of routine where weekends blur together, and you look for excuses to make memories. I worked long weeks. My wife Emily had just finished a rough stretch at her job, and the kids were restless from being cooped up. The idea sounded simple and wholesome, the kind of thing people talk about years later with a laugh. We packed the car early in the morning, thermos rattling between the seats, the kids arguing about music while frost clung to the windows. Nothing about that drive hinted at how sharply the day would turn. It felt like one of those harmless family plans you don't think twice about. That sense of safety stayed with us longer than it should have. The place we chose was a stretch of land locals talked about casually, somewhere between maintained roads and deep woods, with no clear borders once you left the parking area. Signs were sparse, old posts leaning at odd angles, most of them half hidden by brush. Snow hadn't fully settled yet, but the ground was slick, and every step made a quiet crunch that echoed more than expected. We walked deeper than planned, drawn by trees that looked fuller the farther we went. The kids trailed behind, kicking at frozen leaves, while Emily pointed out shapes in the branches. The woods felt empty in a strange way, not peaceful, just quiet enough to make you notice your own breathing. At one point, I remember thinking how easy it would be to get turned around out there. Still, nothing screamed danger, just isolation. The first shot sounded like a firecracker buried underground, a sharp crack followed by a thud as something tore into the dirt a few feet away. Everyone stopped at once, not out of panic but confusion, like our brains needed a second to catch up. A voice followed, shouting words that echoed and bent through the trees, directionless and impossible to pin down. I couldn't tell if it was one person or more, only that it carried anger. Emily grabbed the kids, pulling them close without saying a word. We yelled back that we were leaving, that there had to be some mistake. No response came, just the sound of movement somewhere beyond the tree line. The woods suddenly felt tight, like they were closing around us. Turning back wasn't as simple as retracing steps, not with the slope we'd wandered down without noticing. Another shot cracked through the air, closer this time, hitting the ground hard enough to send bits of frozen soil into my leg. Pain flared, sharp and hot, more from the fall that followed than the impact itself. The kids started crying, not screaming, but the kind of quiet fear that makes everything worse. We moved downhill fast, sliding more than walking, branches snapping against our coats. Cell service flickered uselessly, one bar appearing and disappearing like it was teasing us. I kept thinking the person shooting believed something about us that wasn't true, that in their mind we weren't a family at all. All that mattered then was getting back to the road, wherever it was. The sounds followed us in bursts, not constant, which somehow made it worse. Each crack through the trees reset the fear all over again, forcing us to guess whether it was closer or just echoing differently. Emily stayed behind me, pushing the kids forward, her voice low and steady even though her face had gone pale. My leg protested with every step, the ground dropping away unevenly, roots hidden under leaves waiting to trip us. At one point, we ducked behind a cluster of thick pines, holding still long enough to hear our own breathing. I shouted again that we were lost and leaving, my voice breaking halfway through. The answer was another shot, closer than before, tearing bark off a tree somewhere to our left. Whoever it was didn't want a conversation. The terrain forced us into a narrow path carved by runoff, slick with mud and ice. My foot slipped, and I went down hard, the pain blooming up my side and stealing my breath. Emily didn't hesitate, handing me one of the kids and pulling me back up with a strength I didn't know she had. The kids asked questions in whispers, the kind that break your heart because you don't have answers. I focused on small things just to keep moving. The sound of boots on wet leaves, the smell of pine sap crushed underfoot, the way the light shifted as clouds moved overhead. Every noise felt amplified, like the woods were listening. The idea that someone was tracking us, convinced we were stealing or hunting, settled heavy in my mind. It didn't matter what was true, only what they believed. We finally caught a glimpse of the road through the trees, a thin gray line that looked unreal after so much green and brown. Relief came too early, sharp enough to make my chest ache. Another shot rang out, striking the ground behind us, close enough that I felt it through my feet. We ran the last stretch without thinking, crashing through brush and spilling onto the roadside like we'd been thrown there. Cars passed without slowing, drivers unaware of what had just happened a few yards back. I waved one down, shouting, my voice hoarse and ragged. When someone finally stopped, the words came out in pieces, barely making sense even to me. I kept looking back at the tree line, half expecting someone to step out. Authorities searched the area later, asking questions that felt small compared to what we'd experienced. No shell casings turned up, no witnesses, no clear property markers that explained where we'd crossed. They told us it was likely a local hunter, someone protective of land or game, but nothing could be proven. We went home shaken, scraped, and exhausted, the tree long forgotten. The kids didn't talk much that night, and neither did we. Even now, the memory sits with me, not as a clear image, but as a feeling that rises whenever I think about how thin the line is between a normal day and something else entirely. We walked into those woods expecting a story to tell at Christmas. We left understanding how easily people can become targets without ever knowing why. That night, after the kids finally fell asleep, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table without turning on the overhead light. My leg had swollen enough that every shift in the chair sent a dull ache through my hip. But neither of us wanted to talk about hospitals or reports anymore. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you replay sounds in your head. I kept hearing the crack of the shots, spaced out just enough to feel deliberate. Not wild, not panicked. Calculated. What bothered me most was the intent behind it. The idea that someone made a choice to scare, rather than help. We weren't chased by an accident. We were chased by a belief. Over the next few days, small details from that afternoon kept surfacing without warning. The way the shouting didn't seem rushed. How the shots always landed close enough to send a message, but never close enough to end it. I realized whoever it was knew that land well, knew how sound carried there, knew how hard it would be to escape downhill. That thought stuck with me more than the injury. It meant this wasn't chaos, it was control. I tried explaining that to a friend later and couldn't find the right words. It's hard to describe how terrifying it is to be treated like a threat when you're just trying to leave. We never went back to that area, not even to pick up the car tracks we'd left behind in the snow. The kids asked once if we could try cutting a tree again somewhere else, and the answer came out too fast, too sharp. Even places that look open and harmless can belong to someone in ways you can't see. Public land isn't always as clear as a map makes it seem. I started paying attention to boundaries after that, not just fences or signs, but the invisible ones people enforce with fear. Every wooded area I pass now feels different, heavier somehow. I don't assume silence means safety anymore. What still unsettles me is that we'll never know who fired those shots or how close we came to something worse. That person went back to their life, convinced they'd protected something, while we carried the memory home. Nothing followed us after that day. No threats, no calls, no explanations. It just stopped. And maybe that's what makes it linger. There was no lesson wrapped neatly at the end, no justice to point to. Just a normal family outing that ended with the quiet understanding that being in the wrong place, at the wrong moment, can turn strangers into enemies without a single word exchanged. At that point in my life, nights were quiet and predictable, the kind where errands felt automatic and nothing ever broke routine. Work had me staying late more often than I liked, and grocery shopping became a last stop before heading home. The store sat under harsh white lights, nearly empty, with that echo you only notice after midnight. I remember thinking how tired everyone looked, like the day had wrung us out the same way. The air outside felt sharp and clean, carrying the smell of wet pavement and old leaves. My apartment was only a few blocks away, a straight walk through streets I knew well. Nothing about that night felt special enough to remember. At least, not at first. Near the entrance, a man stood just beyond the automatic doors, dressed head to toe as Santa Claus. The coat looked thick and worn, the red dulled to something closer to rust, with white trim that had gone gray. He held a plastic donation bucket with a bell taped to the handle, shaking it slowly instead of ringing it. His beard sat crooked on his face, revealing a mouth that moved too much when he talked. When he asked for a donation, his voice came out flat, almost bored. I declined politely and kept walking, already digging for my keys. Behind me, his tone changed, slipping into comments about people forgetting the meaning of Christmas. They weren't loud, just sharp enough to land. The farther I walked, the more his words followed, carried by the quiet street. He talked about greed and how people like me ruined things for everyone else. Each sentence ended with a forced laugh that echoed longer than it should have. I glanced back once and saw him still there, Santa coat swaying as he moved. He didn't hurry or slow down, just kept the same distance, the donation bucket swinging at his side. Streetlights flashed across the white trim, making it look dirty and uneven. Cars passed now and then, but none slowed. His footsteps stayed steady, patient, like he had nowhere else to be. By the time my building came into view, my breathing felt shallow and rushed. The lobby door required a key fob, and the small glass entrance suddenly seemed fragile. I slipped inside and let the door close behind me, the lock clicking louder than usual. Through the glass, he stopped just outside, staring in as if studying a display window. His voice carried through the door, accusing, disappointed, telling me I hadn't learned anything. The bucket thudded once against the glass when he stepped closer. He grabbed the handle and pulled. hard enough to rattle the frame. That was when fear stopped feeling abstract and turned heavy and real. I backed away toward the elevator bank, my eyes locked on the door as if it might suddenly give in. The lobby lights hummed overhead, casting reflections across the tiled floor that made everything feel unreal. He pressed his face close to the glass, the fake beard brushing against it, and raised the bucket again. This time he shook it, not rhythmically, just enough to make the loose coins clatter. He said people needed consequences to understand generosity. The way he spoke sounded rehearsed, like lines practiced alone. When the door didn't open, his expression hardened into something tense and focused. He yanked the handle again, harder, the metal shrieking briefly. I fumbled for my phone and called the police, keeping my voice low even though he was still talking. While I waited for the dispatcher, he stepped back and paced the sidewalk in short lines, never leaving the doorway. He pointed at the building, then at me, still visible through the glass. His words shifted from scolding to corrective, like a teacher losing patience. He said Christmas was about learning, and lessons weren't meant to be comfortable. Each sentence felt aimed straight at me, personal and deliberate. The Santa hat slipped sideways as he moved, exposing short dark hair beneath. That detail stuck with me more than it should have. After a few minutes, headlights swept across the street, and the sound of an engine slowed nearby. The man stopped pacing and looked down the road, then back at me. His mouth tightened, and he leaned close to the glass one last time. He tapped the bucket against the door softly, almost gently, as if making a point. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing between parked cars without looking back. By the time the patrol car pulled up, the sidewalk was empty. The officers checked the area, took my statement, and nodded like this wasn't the first strange thing they'd heard that season. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound from the hallway. The next morning, I found a small smear on the lobby glass where his beard had brushed it, a faint white streak I couldn't stop staring at. Management later said they'd review the cameras, but nothing came of it. I never saw the man again, Santa suit or otherwise. Still, every December when donation bells start ringing outside stores, my chest tightens. I take different routes home now, even in familiar neighborhoods. Whatever lesson he thought he was teaching never landed the way he wanted, but it stayed with me longer than I care to admit. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had been an isolated incident, just someone unhinged using a costume as cover. I went back to work, stuck to my routines, and told friends a watered-down version that sounded less frightening when spoken out loud. Still, small details refused to fade. The scrape marks near the lobby handle hadn't been there before. A neighbor mentioned hearing someone rattling the door late that night, but assumed it was drunk college kids. Management eventually sent an email reminding residents not to let strangers into the building. Reading it felt surreal, like proof that it had really happened. A week later, while shopping earlier in the evening, I saw another Santa collecting donations near a different store. This one looked cleaner, friendlier, surrounded by families and kids tugging at their parents' coats. Even so, my body reacted before my mind could. I took a wide detour around him, heart pounding, eyes scanning for that same worn coat and dull white trim. Nothing happened, and I felt embarrassed by how shaken I was. That night, though, I checked the lobby door twice before going upstairs. I started paying attention to reflections in windows, footsteps behind me, the rhythm of bells in the distance. Eventually, I asked building management to let me move to a unit on a higher floor, closer to the stairwell cameras. They didn't ask many questions, just processed the request. A few weeks after that, new security measures went in. Better lighting outside, reinforced glass, clearer signage. Life slowly settled back into something close to normal. I stopped expecting to see red fabric at every corner. The fear dulled, turning into something quieter, like a low background noise I could ignore most days. Even now, years later, I still think about how calmly he walked, how sure he seemed that he was right. Nothing else ever came of it. No arrest, no follow-up, no explanation. Maybe he moved on to someone else, or maybe he disappeared as suddenly as he arrived. I don't know. What I do know is that I trust my instincts more than I used to, and I don't dismiss small moments anymore. That night ended without physical harm, without headlines or answers, but it changed how I move through the world. And every December, when I pass a donation bucket, I remember how close a normal night came to turning into something much worse.